Good morning. Welcome to the Missouri Public Transit Association's education series, Overdose Education and Naloxone Distribution Training. My name is Mike Foley. I'm the Assistant Director of the Missouri Public Transit Association. MPTA provider members provide more than 42 million rides almost everywhere throughout the state every day in Missouri. They employ thousands in our communities. I would like to welcome the MPTA board members who are joining us via Zoom this morning. Thank you all for attending. Today's training covers a variety of information on several areas concerning addiction and overdoses. Topics covered include what is addiction, the changing landscape of drug use, saving lives and harm reduction, opioid overdoses, and resources available. Our presenters today are Larry Kirk and Stephen Buckley with Metro St. Louis. The presentation covers existing efforts to combat the opioid crisis and legislative protections from naloxone use and dispensing, as well as showing us how to correctly identify and respond to an overdose event. The program is supported by Prevent Ed and the DOTS project and the Missouri Institute of Mental Health at the University of Missouri St. Louis. Larry Kirk is a native of Laurel, Mississippi, joined Bi-State Development Metro Transit in 2020 as the training coordinator with Metro Public Safety. Prior to joining the agency, he spent 25 years in law enforcement before retiring at the rank of Chief of Police. Stephen Buckley is a native of St. Louis and retired police officer. Stephen served 28 years with the city of Berkeley, Missouri, where he held the rank of captain. He's a graduate of the 233rd session of the FBI National Academy. Stephen was the department's training coordinator for over 15 years and has been an instructor with more than 20 years experience. Welcome, Larry and Stephen. As always, please place your questions in the Q&A or chat box at the bottom of your screen. Larry, if you'd like to start us off.
Hey, thank you, everyone. I'm really appreciative for y'all inviting us today. I know myself and Steve are very excited to be able to present this program and provide any type of information that we can, not for just the program that we developed here, but also make sure that you can be put into contact with other resources. So when we first looked into the program and was trying to see where we wanted to go with it, both of our experiences are previously in the law enforcement field. When the Naloxone became an issue statewide, I was actually one of the ones that went to Jefferson City to campaign and to talk to state reps and state senators about the idea of having more accessible Naloxone, especially for law enforcement agencies. Now, Buckley will tell you as well that there was a lot of mixed emotions about the Naloxone program when it came to law enforcement. However, the last couple of years, we're seeing a change in that attitude when it comes to it. And I think more and more people are feeling more comfortable with the idea of harm reduction, and especially programs like what we've developed here. So a little bit on the background, I originally had worked with UMSL and Prevent Ed and a couple of other groups obtaining naloxone for an agency I was previously working at out in Lincoln County. And then I followed that up with another agency here in St. Louis County. So a lot of our efforts have been really been helped a lot by that, because having that availability for education and availability to get the naloxone helped us create the program here. So on our next slide, we kind of point out that the program is supported by Prevent Ed. It does come through UMSL. Like I said, at the end of the course, I do want to make sure we mention a few names and put people into contact, especially in the St. Louis area. If they're in another area, they know individuals that they can reach out to help start a program. And again, when we talk about the program, without having other neighbors, I like to talk about community neighbors, community relationships, especially in transit. And we were talking about before the class started here. Transit is the front line of every aspect of our communities. We see, high-level executives that use transit. We have high school students who use transit. Every day, people going to and from work and to their meetings. When we're out there on that front line, we deal with people's individuals' traumas. We deal with their individual, challenges they're going through each day. Part of that could be addiction issues. So we see that on the front line. So with UMSL, we've been proud to partner with that, and we've seen great success. Our program in the first few months, from September until December of last year, we had 8 saves. So far this year, we're either at 8 or 9. To put that in perspective, we teach CPR and AED, which is mandatory for a lot of our employees. So far in the last 2 years, we have had no CPR events recorded, no AED reports recorded. But we have over a dozen and a half, or right at a dozen and a half saves with the Narcan. So it shows you the impact that you can have, especially when it comes to health in your communities. Okay. So on our next slide, kind of want to make sure we cover what the videos we're going to talk about today. And at the end of each video, I want to maybe highlight a couple points and open up if you have a quick question you want to put in the chat box. Mike can get that to us to follow up on. And of course, we'll do an overall review and question and answer session at the end. But the first chapter, we're going to talk about what is addiction, because I have to tell you now, even being a former law enforcement officer, I can remember a time where when I was working on my master's and I was working, talking about drug control policy, was really learning what addiction meant and in understanding how that can hamper an individual's growth and how that is something critical and crucial to overcoming in people's lives. So chapter 1, we want to talk about what is addiction. So we'll have Mike roll that for us.
We're having technical difficulties. There's no sound. Mike, can you check the share sound, please?
Sorry, are we not having sound on the outside? Someone just texted me and said that they weren't getting sound, and I'm getting sound on my end.
Yeah, I'm not getting anything.
No sound on your end. Okay, let me try and get let me see if
Welcome to Overdose.
any sound at this point.
Very low.
I can hear it a little bit.
Overdoses, saving lives. This video is about how to have an overdose.
That's a lot better.
Much better.
Couldn't hear anything before. Thank you.
Higher chance of witnessing or having an opioid overdose, and teaching them what signs to look for, how to protect themselves and others, and where to find help. It also means knowing how to get and use Naloxone, a medicine that can reverse the effects of an opioid overdose. But first, let's back up and look at what addiction is. Chapter 1, what is addiction, or a story inside the brain. When we talk about drug addiction or substance use disorder, we often hear things like, why don't people just quit? Well, it's not that simple. Some drugs actually change the way our brain works. And once that happens, quitting isn't just a matter of willpower. So how do these drugs change our brain? The brain has a neurotransmitter called dopamine, and it's what makes us feel good when we do certain activities. When we eat, we get a 50% boost in dopamine. Having sex can lead to a 100% boost. It's nature's reward system for doing things we need to do to survive as a species. But some drugs can hijack that reward system in the brain. For example, the nicotine in cigarettes can lead to a 115% boost in dopamine. That's why it's so hard for so many people to quit smoking. Their brain is used to getting a reward. And when they stop, it's not. Opioids, which are pain medicines like OxyContin, or illegal drugs like heroin or fentanyl, can lead to a 2,200% dopamine boost. That's far more than our brains can handle. So what happens? When someone starts using a drug, the pleasurable effects can make them want to keep using it. Over time, the brain and body become dependent on the drug. The brain can't produce enough dopamine on its own anymore. When this happens, the person starts needing the drug to just feel normal, not high, just normal. When they don't have the drug in their system, they go into withdrawal, which can mean pain, vomiting, diarrhea, and other severe health problems. Many people who have a dependence on opioids don't use to get high, but to avoid withdrawals. So does that mean everyone who uses opioids will get addicted? It doesn't. In fact, there's a difference between physical dependence and addiction. Many of us have dependencies on substances, like the caffeine in your morning coffee. Without it, you might feel a little sluggish or even get a caffeine headache. That's a dependence. But when you become so dependent on substance or drug that you can't do things you want or need to do, like go to work or take care of your family, yet you continue to use, that's addiction. Like most other health problems, addiction can be treated. The first step is to lower the effects of withdrawal. That's where medicines to treat addiction, such as methadone or buprenorphine, come in. These medicines act like a buffer. They keep the brain in a normal state.
We lost the volume again. Sorry.
Video paused. Let me see.
But they don't make people feel high. This allows them to get out of the cycle of addiction and use other services that can help them rebuild their life, such as counseling, employment support services, or recovery housing. Recovery is possible. It happens every day, and we can help people get better.
All right, thank you. So before we move on to chapter 2, I always want to make sure that if anybody has any questions that they can put those in the box and we'll follow up with them. But for me, as you watch chapter 1, I think a lot of people have a misunderstanding of physical dependency and addiction and the difference between that and someone who just may be using an illicit drug just to reach a high. So we talk about the dopamine levels, that inability for your brain to keep reaching that level, and then eventually that becoming the norm just to use to stay at a regular level. Also when later on in this presentation, we'll talk about a lot of times people are using, they're self-medicating for traumatic events that's happened in their lives, something they get triggered from. And if we don't also allow people the opportunity to address that trauma, a lot of times people say, well, you know what, if we arrest them and put them in jail or prison, they'll clean up there. But the problem is that's somewhat true. They may get off of drugs for a few weeks or a few months and come out clean. But again, if they are self-medicating for some type of trauma or mental illness that's not being treated correctly, then they'll eventually turn back to the illegal drug use because again, that problem that they have mentally, that mental health aspect of it is not being treated. So that's one thing here in St. Louis now at Bi-State, we've been working really close with Chestnut Health Systems, and they're out there in the alignment now, and they're doing referrals for drug treatment and referrals for mental health. So we're combining our efforts, and I think that that's really helping us a lot, not just in seeing the saves that we're getting from the Naloxone program, but maybe down the line and actually treating the mental illness or the trauma that these people are facing and are going through that are turning them to drug use. So on the next chapter, we'll start talking about the changing landscape of drug use, and then we'll follow up with any questions you may have after that as well.
Use or the story outside the brain. Now that we understand how addiction affects the brain, let's look at how it affects people in the communities we live in. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, estimates that 192 people in the US die from a drug overdose every single day. That's more than 70,000 people a year, or the size of a small city. And while this isn't a new problem, it's gotten worse over the last few years. In response to the opioid crisis, doctors started prescribing less pain medicines. As a result, more illegal drugs like heroin and fentanyl, a synthetic opioid, are being circulated. These drugs are much stronger than prescription opioids, and they are often mixed with other dangerous substances. This makes it even more likely that someone using these drugs will overdose and die. Fentanyl is an especially big problem in the Midwest. In St. Louis, this drug was involved in 90% of overdose deaths in 2018. While opioid addiction is a problem everywhere, some communities are more affected by it than others. Black men are almost 3 times as likely to die from an overdose as white men, while Black women die at almost twice the rate of white women. So why do these differences exist? There is no easy answer, but things like less access to healthcare services or a fear of calling 911 play a role. Many people from communities of color also say that their communities have been struggling with drug addiction for decades, but haven't gotten the help they need. That's why it's important to have conversations about overdose education, to recognize risk factors, and to be prepared to help if you witness an overdose. Knowing how to protect yourself and others, and having naloxone ready at hand could save someone's life on any day.
All right, so again, another just quick, some stats to kind of look at. We do see that, especially here in St. Louis. So out of our 18 saves so far, we just actually reported our first female of color. I think maybe a couple of weeks ago was the first time we've had that happen. Before that, all of our victims in the overdose that we had worked were all African-American males. That's very telling. Again, with the stat that we talked about before, when we look at the risk factors, because a lot of times, a lot of these services that we can provide, a lot of times do not reach communities of color. And on top of that, we do have the fear of law enforcement. So again, myself and Mr. Buckley have, over 50 years of law enforcement experience, and we can understand that. We're very empathetic of understanding that fear of wanting to call, because we do know that in some aspects of law enforcement, there are disparities. Even right now, when you look at the way we are addressing the current opioid epidemic in our country, if you look at the way we've handled it with harm reduction programs and things like Naloxone, we are handling it a lot different than we did the crack cocaine epidemic of the late 80s, early 90s. So it's very telling, but it's also very, to me, a very positive sign, because we are addressing it in different ways. One thing you learn in law enforcement, you can't just keep arresting everyone, because if you clear out an entire street corner, within days, that street corner will be replaced by new people. So we had to find new ways to address issues. And with us, you saw the numbers in St. Louis area, especially in Missouri, with issues with heroin and fentanyl. One of the numbers they talked about was the 70-something thousand number. I just double checked. I know back in November of last year, the CDC had released information showing that the 12-month period that ended in August of 2021, we saw an increase of 28.5% of drug overdoses. They went up from 78,000 to close out at 100,306 last year. So that shows you that number eclipses so many other causes of death in our country, including handguns, including accidents. So 100,000 people is a lot. So you do have an availability to impact your community as a transit agency, because again, transit agencies serve a lot of individuals. We have to keep that in mind. So chapter 3, we're going to continue on and talk about saving lives using harm reduction and some programs that we can look at and see how that assists in our communities as well.
Chapter 3, saving lives using harm reduction. When it comes to addiction, the first goal is to save lives. One way to do that is to use harm reduction. We all use harm reduction strategies every day. Seat belts and airbags are there to protect us in a car crash. When we ride bikes or motorcycles, we put on a helmet. We all know that driving a car, riding a bike, or cruising on a motorcycle can be risky, so we take steps to protect ourselves. In the same way, there are harm reduction strategies for people who use drugs. Putting those strategies in place doesn't mean it's safe to use drugs. Just like using a seatbelt doesn't mean you won't get in a car crash. But it means that if you do, you have a better chance of staying alive. And that, in the end, is what it's all about. So what do harm reduction strategies for drug use look like? First, people should never use alone. It's much safer to have another person there who can call for help or administer naloxone, also known as Narcan, and other first aid strategies if an overdose happens. If someone does use alone, there are still things they can do to protect themselves, such as letting someone know so they can call or text to check on them, or using in a place that has heavy foot traffic so they can be found quickly if they overdose. If you think someone's going to use, encourage them to start small and test their shot, especially if they haven't used in a few days or longer. This means they should start with a little and see how they feel before using more. It only takes 3 to 5 days of not using for someone to lose their tolerance level for opioids, no matter how long they have been using the drug. Also, the drug supply is constantly changing, and you never know how strong a new batch is. It's good to remind people that it's not safe to share or reuse needles or syringes. However, if they do, it's best to flush it with cold, clean water. Disinfect with bleach for at least 2 minutes, then flush again. Cleaning the injection site with warm soapy water or an alcohol swab before injecting can help avoid infections. Remember, the goal is for people to stay as safe and healthy as possible. Another harm reduction strategy is to stagger use if people are using together, which means taking turns using, waiting 30 minutes or as long as possible between each other. This is especially important if they are using a different drug or if they've gotten the drug from a different source and aren't sure what's in it. This way, if one person overdoses, the other one might be able to save them. It's also good to make sure that everyone who might have or might witness an overdose knows where life-saving medicines such as naloxone are kept. But what if someone witnesses an overdose but is afraid to call 911 because they don't want to get in trouble? That's where Missouri's Good Samaritan law comes in. It says that if you call for help for any medical emergency, like a drug or alcohol overdose, you and the person who needs help can't get in trouble for having or using drugs, or for some related offenses, such as possession of an altered ID, sale of alcohol to a minor, violation of a restraining order, and violation of probation or parole. However, people can still get charged for other offenses like distributing drugs or having an active warrant. Taken together, These harm reduction strategies can help people stay alive. You now know several harm reduction strategies. Harm reduction meets people where they are at and treats everyone with dignity and respect. It celebrates any positive change that reduces harm for people who use drugs. Harm reduction acknowledges the reality that drug use is part of our world, and sobriety is not the goal for every person. Keep this in mind as you have conversations about overdose education, and remember to be non-judgmental. Also, remember to use positive language when describing people with substance use disorders. Avoid terms that do not convey respect for individuals and are stigmatizing, like addict and substance abuser. Instead, use person-first language, such as a person who uses drugs. So if you know someone who's at risk of using drugs, or who might live with someone who uses, talk to them. Make sure they know how to protect themselves from the worst effects of a drug overdose. Research has shown that learning about harm reduction strategies doesn't make people more likely to use drugs. Just like wearing a seatbelt doesn't make you a more reckless driver, but it may very well save a life.
All right, so a couple of points I always like to bring forward from that. I think a great analogy is the issue with the seatbelt and helmets. A lot of people who have negative feelings about programs such as ours and the Naloxone programs will say that programs like this make it safer to use drugs and it encourages drug use. Well, that's not true. One, just like it says in there, if you put on your seatbelt every day, does that mean you're going to drive faster to work? I own a street bike, a Yamaha R1, very quick bike. Wear a motorcycle every time I get on it. Doesn't mean, hey, I'm going to put a motorcycle on, so now I'm going to go out there and do 120. No, I'm just trying to stay safe. So whenever we get to the chapter 3, it's very interesting because some people get very uneasy talking about harm reduction programs because they still have a kind of unfounded belief that this is encouraging drug use. And what we're trying to do is encourage people to stay as healthy as possible till they get to the point to where they are ready to become clean. And just like it says in that chapter and that video, not everyone's at that point yet. And we know that. And I teach this class, we know that we may provide this service to someone one day and the next day they may overdose and pass away. But we do what we can to get them to that next step. And that does happen. I've actually got an individual that I had a Naloxone save off duty, wasn't even on duty at the time. That person ended up reaching out to me through Facebook, told me that they went through rehab that month, have stayed in a program afterwards, and now it's almost 2.5 years after the save with her, and her life has turned around. And I'm sure that's not the case for everybody within that time. But just like I tell people in law enforcement, I was trained a lot of different ways to detain people, to use force in response to resistance, and trained in multiple firearms. Just a simple thing like this about being there for someone in an overdose situation, you can be that catalyst that does make them change. There was a really great interview the other day with a young lady who had been revived 5 different times with Naloxone. Eventually, that 5th time, she got clean. She's been clean for over a year now. And she said each time she learned from those events and it finally came together for her. So understand that a lot of research has been done on harm reduction programs. We're not seeing any data that shows that any harm reduction programs contribute to either greater drug use or riskier drug use. Matter of fact, in a lot of the areas we've done pilot programs, such as needle exchanges, or in one instance where they were actually field testing the heroin to check for fentanyl levels, they're actually seeing reduction in overdoses, where the rest of the country is seeing increases in them. So it is a difficult conversation to have with people sometimes. One reason that we recently pushed out our program to everyone at Bi-State, we had it for our first line TSSs. We're now teaching to operators. We have taught it to programs within our company like marketing, our business services as well. We have it now at the airport that we oversee, and we also have it at the river boats by the arch. So again, it's touching a lot of aspects of the community we serve, but we actually now hand out the Narcan kits, Oxycontin and Naloxone, with 2 dosage units to anyone who requested in the agency. And, you know, a lot of people are like, well, why are you doing that? That's, you know, our employees shouldn't be using, you know, heroin. But you have to remember, we all have friends, we all have families. I have friends I know that had addiction issues in the past. Our trauma class that we teach has had such amazing feedback on other aspects. For example, the reason why I really wanted to push out being able to give Narcan or Naloxone to our fellow employees is this. I had an email from a lady after teaching the trauma class that talked about last November, her brother came to the house for Thanksgiving, and during Thanksgiving dinner, overdosed. He had used right prior to getting to the house, and while at the house, overdosed. People in his family knew he'd used, knew that he was having issues with addiction. None of them knew what to do in case of overdose. So she said, hey, you know, now I wanted to learn more about it. I want to be more supportive of him as he goes through these tribulations. And I want to have some way to help him here at the house if that was to happen again. So, you know, it's not just now wanting us to make sure that we're keeping our customers happy, our community happy, but also our work environment. And we'll make sure that the people we work with, our friends and family here at Bi-State, are also able to take care of their friends and family away from the workplace. So in chapter 4, we're kind of moving on to opioid overdoses, and we'll start that video for you now.
Chapter 4, opioid overdoses. Who's at risk, how to recognize an overdose, and what to do to help. When we talk about saving lives and preventing overdoses, we also need to talk about risk factors. While it's true that everyone who misuses opioids could overdose, there are some things that put people at a higher risk. Here are some of them. Using again after a period of not using. People can lose their tolerance level for opioids after as little as 3 to 5 days of not using. Often, this happens when people have just been released from jail or prison, or have gone through detox or a hospital stay, and are early in their recovery. Using a different drug than usual, or getting it from a different source, are risk factors for an overdose. Those drugs might have unknown substances in them, or contain more fentanyl, which is much stronger than other opioids. Injecting a drug raises the risk of an overdose, though an overdose is still possible if opioids are snorted or smoked. Having a history of depression or other mental health problems can make it more likely that a person will overdose. Some overdoses are actually suicide attempts, so someone who has attempted suicide before can have a higher risk. Being ill or having chronic health problems can mean a higher risk of an overdose, especially if that health problem impacts their breathing. Mixing opioids with other drugs can make an overdose more likely. It is especially dangerous to mix opioids with drugs that slow down breathing, such as alcohol, sleeping medicine, or anxiety medicine like Xanax. Some social factors also play a role, such as using alone or being homeless. Also, people who have had an overdose before are at greater risk of it happening again. Keep in mind that those risk factors will be very different from one person to another. Also, it's not just people with substance use disorder who can have an overdose. Anyone who has access to opioids, even if they have been prescribed by a doctor, can be at risk if one or more of the things listed here are true for them. So, what does an opioid overdose look like? To start with, let's focus on the 3 most important signs. 1, the person is passed out and can't be woken up. They are not breathing well, or maybe not at all. 3, their pupils, which is the dark part in the middle of the eye, may be very small, although this isn't always true, depending on if the person has mixed opioids with other drugs. There may be other signs, such as a change in skin color. People with darker skin may turn gray, and those with lighter skin may turn blue. Some people also have what's called a death rattle, a gurgling sound when they breathe. Sometimes it's hard to know exactly why a person isn't breathing well or why they won't wake up. The good news is that there's no downside to doing any of the first aid steps we'll talk about next. Even if they don't have an overdose, but another health emergency, you will not hurt them by providing naloxone. Here's what to do if you think someone is having an overdose. Step 1, give naloxone. Naloxone is a medicine that can reverse the effects of an overdose. The most common form is a nasal spray called Narcan. Using it is as simple as unwrapping the package, putting the device in the person's nostril, and pressing the plunger. It usually takes about 2 to 3 minutes for the medicine to work. If you have a mobile phone, call 911 now and put it on speaker. That way, you can talk to emergency services while you continue with the next steps. Step 2, start mouth to mouth or rescue breathing. During an opioid overdose, people don't breathe deeply or often enough, if they breathe at all. This means the brain doesn't get enough oxygen. Here's how to do rescue breathing. 1, kneel down next to the person. 2, tilt their head back and lift their chin. This will open their airway so the air can get through to the lungs. Some naloxone kits come with a breathing mask to protect the person doing rescue breathing from germs. If you have a breathing mask, lay it over the person's mouth. 3, pinch the person's nose. Take a deep breath and seal your lips around the outside of the person's mouth. 4, breathe into the person's mouth steadily, about every 5 to 7 seconds. There's no need to blow too hard, just enough to make their chest rise. 5, keep breathing into the person's mouth for 2 to 3 minutes or until they start breathing well again. 6, if the person isn't breathing after 2 to 3 minutes, they may need a second dose of naloxone. Most naloxone kits contain 2 doses of medicine. If you are using a Narcan nasal spray, put the second dose of Narcan in the other nostril. Step 3. If you haven't already done so, call 911 and describe what has happened. Some people may not be comfortable saying that there are drugs involved for fear of getting in trouble. Remember, Missouri's Good Samaritan laws protect the person who calls for help during an emergency, as well as the person who overdosed. But if you're still unsure, it may be enough to say that someone is passed out and not breathing. The goal is to save a life. If you have to leave the person for any reason, to call for help or get naloxone, put them in the recovery position. This will keep their airway open and make sure the person doesn't choke if they throw up. Here's how to put someone in the recovery position. 1, kneel beside the person. 2, straighten their arms and legs. 3, fold the arm closest to you over their chest. 4, place the other arm at a right angle to their body. 5, get the leg closest to you and bend the knee. 6, support the person's head and neck. Gently take the bent knee closest to you and roll the person away from you. Adjust the upper leg so both the hip and knee are bent at right angles. 7, tilt the head back and make sure the airway is open. Naloxone wears off in about an hour. Some drugs last longer than this, so while it's rare, it's possible for a second overdose to happen. That's why you should always call 911, even if the person wakes up on their own. Here's one more thing that's good to know. Naloxone is the only thing that can reliably reverse the effects of an overdose. You hear stories about home remedies, such as slapping someone, cold showers, ice, or even injecting milk or salt water into their veins, don't believe them. Giving naloxone, doing rescue breathing, and calling 911 are the only safe ways to help someone who has overdosed. Sometimes people hesitate to help when they witness an overdose because they're afraid what the person will do when they wake up. The truth is, most of the time, they simply wake up. You may be confused, irritable, or even throw up, kind of like someone with a bad hangover. But only about 4 out of 100 people are combative when they wake up after an overdose. It's also not possible to have an overdose yourself just by helping someone who's taken drugs. Some people may be worried about being exposed to fentanyl. They may have heard stories about someone having an overdose just by being near the drug. Don't believe those either. If fentanyl touches unbroken skin, it will not be absorbed into the body in a measurable amount. If someone accidentally touches fentanyl, they can simply wash their hands with soap and cold water and will be fine. Don't use alcohol-based hand sanitizer, as those only kill germs instead of cleaning the hands. You may also have heard that some forms of fentanyl are resistant to naloxone, another myth. A stronger drug may require more naloxone, but 1 to 2 doses should be enough to reverse most overdoses.
All right, so a lot of information there in chapter 4. Again, a couple things. Risk factors whenever it comes to people being recently released from incarceration is always an issue, same as when people are getting released out of a treatment center. Whether, especially we see a lot of individuals who will come out of like a weekend stay at a jail facility for maybe a warrant, or they do 5 to 7 days and they'll come out. Sometimes that person immediately turns again to drug use. Sometimes they may have cleaned up enough to where they feel confident. But in each of those instances, a lot of times what happens is, again, that mental illness or that trauma comes back to haunt them, and they eventually turn to using again. Because in jail, most times you don't get any type of treatment for that trauma or for that mental health issue. And you're not getting treatment for addiction. You're just not getting it available to you. So again, even a short stay, 3 to 5 days, can change someone's tolerance level. And on top of that, back in the day, a lot of people who use drugs had to be concerned about the different levels of whether or not the purity of this heroin is more than what I'm used to. But now with the fentanyl being put into the product, that's even changed the landscape even more. So just because someone went in jail or went to a drug addiction facility and come out, we hope that they have been able to address their issues. But a lot of times addiction counseling makes for a lot of trips, it makes for a lot of time and investment. So it's not something that happens overnight. So if they turn back and they do get re-triggered and do have a traumatic experience and turn to drug use, then we know that that is a possibility that one more use, that one more turn can end up making it to where it's an instance of death. And for overdoses too, always be aware that people can be using multiple drugs. The Narcan, again, it says in here for heroin overdose, that's what we can do. If you don't have it on you and you've had CPR, you can do the rescue breathing aspect of it. That'll help until hopefully maybe somebody can get there with the naloxone for you. And also too, when we talk about these individuals waking up, we hear this a lot of times for law enforcement. They're like, well, if we use this, they're going to jump up and fight us. And a lot of individuals thought that was very common. The number that we saw in here was about 4%, 4 out of 100. What we're actually seeing St. Louis area and those agencies are connected to the DOTS project. We're actually seeing it around 98% wake up or non-combative or anything like that. Most of the times when it happens, it is someone who may have warrants or criminal history past, and that person, when they come to, was sitting in a room with friends or was doing, in a drive-through at a Hardee's. And next thing they do, they wake up, they're surrounded by individuals with badges, they're surrounded by flashing lights. And of course, that's going to be a threat to some individuals. But in most cases, they just wake up and they're just confused. That's about it. And I think, do we have a question, Buckley? Oh, you got to unmute yourself real quick.
Sorry about that. One thing I'd like to add to this slide is when we talk about factors that cause this, Larry's mentioned several times about traumatic events. Larry and I are both trauma-informed instructors as well. And male individuals who have a 4 or more higher score in trauma are 4,700% more likely to use intravenous drugs than their counterparts. So if you think about drug use and reasons for that, a lot of that goes into the individual's personal history and traumatic experiences. So if you think about that, that's 4,700% more likely to use intravenous drugs if they have 4 or more traumatic events in their life and they're male. So that's just something I'd like to throw out there, why we're having such an epidemic that we are.
That's a great point. It really goes back to talking about the teamwork that we've done with Chestnut. And if you have agencies like that in your area, it's great to work with them, because now, you know, in the past, a lot of people were like, well, when it comes to drug use, when it comes to heroin, either they get off of it, or you know what, either they'll end up in jail or they'll kill themselves. That's not really a positive pathway to recovery. And so for us, you know, we want to be able to get people referred into systems. So working with Chestnut and having Chestnut be out there with our TSSs, talking to operators and coming across individuals who are having these challenges are great, because again, that adds another aspect for us to use. It's teamwork is really the answer to helping a lot of the ills in our society, and that's being able to cross-reference our abilities to do things and, you know, leaning on others to help us in those resources. So, you know, on all that, we wanted to provide a video here that's going to give you some resource information, and at the end of it, I'm going to come back and actually add some more to that for you.
Chapter 5, Resources. As you can see, there are plenty of good reasons to know about overdose education, talk about it with those around you, and to have naloxone ready at hand. If you think naloxone might be hard to come by, don't worry. There are a lot of places where you can get naloxone at little or no cost. You can buy naloxone at any pharmacy in Missouri without a prescription. It may even be covered by your health insurance. But not every pharmacy will have it in stock, so call ahead just to be sure. Go to nomodeth.org/where-to-get-naloxone or mohopeproject.org/resources/get-naloxone to find places where you can get naloxone for free. Here's a list of places where you can learn more about overdose education and prevention, as well as how to access treatment options for addiction. Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, samhsa.gov. SAMHSA treatment locator at 1-800-622-HELP or samhsa.gov/find-treatment. Missouri Department of Mental Health, 1-800-273-TALK or dmh.mo.gov/alcohol-drug/help. You can also go to nomodeth.org/get-treatment. Some people may be interested in treatment while others aren't. It can be helpful to approach conversations about substance use in a non-judgmental way and remind the people you talk to that you are there for them and are willing to help. You can refer them to their doctor to talk about the medicines discussed earlier, and persistence may be necessary. Sometimes it takes multiple calls to multiple places to find a good match for help. If you had or witnessed an overdose, help us serve you better by filling out an overdose field report, ODFR, at mohopeproject.org/OD report. Don't worry, your submission is anonymous, which means you won't be asked for your name or address. This report is meant to help decision makers know where resources are needed. If you have further questions on how to have overdose education conversations or about naloxone distribution programs, please reach out to the MoHope team at mohopeproject.org/help. mohopproject@mimh.edu. Brandon Costierison at mohop@ncada-stl.org, or Lauren Green at lauren.green@mimh.edu.
All right, that's the videos we have for you. And then, like I said, I wanted to kind of cover there at the end some of the organizations that were mentioned. The original group I worked with was MoHope Project. When we started the project here, they moved us to the DOTS Project. The MoHope Project program ran out last year. There is still some street level work that they do. But if you're working for an agency or organization that wants to do a program kind of like we've established, reach out to me. There's my email on the screen there, lakirk@metro STL, instead because some people spell out Saint, metro STL-Lewis.org. My extension here at Bi-State's 2223. My email goes to my cell phone, so I'll answer that pretty quickly. If you're interested in doing a program like this or looking more into it for some information, contact me. I'll put you in contact with our individuals that we work with hand in hand at the MIMH. And they are quick to respond. They are very emotionally invested in this project, much like me and Buckley are here at Metro. And they will definitely help you get in contact with someone in your area, if you're not in the St. Louis area, that can provide that. Because I know the DOTS project, we work throughout Kansas City, down in Jeff City and Springfield. The program provides us with boxes of the Narcan. This is a 2 dosage unit. And people ask, well, how hard is it to store? How is it to carry? Our TSSs carry a box, a little Tupperware box that has that in it. 2 dosage units, gloves are in there. And then we replace that each time. I know departments that have bought old cell phone cases for officers' belts. You can easily slide 2 of these into that as well. In the training, we usually do the exact same training that we did here today for each of you. Again, it's a spectacular program that allows you to really give back to the community. And again, I don't know outside of the police department aspect, and like I say, go back to my past background, that you really get opportunity to see a wide variety of the community that you serve, whether it's your operators or frontline security. So I think it's worked great for us. And I think, again, with our help from Chestnut, our help from UMSL at MIMH, I think we've really got a program that's working well, not just saving lives. I think it's really changing the culture and the perspective of people when it comes to addiction, transient populations in our area, and mental health. And Buckley, I don't know if you agree completely, but I think you do. So if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, again, like Larry said, coming from a law enforcement background, when myself and the fire chief brought it to the city we worked for, there was a little pushback. Everybody thought the same thing. Hey, we're just enabling. But once they got out there and took the training and understood what we were doing, the culture changed. Here at Bi-State, when we took it to our field officers, they were on board from the go. And it's apparent by the number of saves and how fast they try to get there to do that. So we highly recommend this program. It is very valuable to not just yourself, but your organization.
And one thing too, like I said, when we teach the trauma class here, we have an understanding human trauma course that's now corporate wide at Bi-State. We talk about addiction issues. We talk about how people are triggered from past traumas. One of the things that we really work on in a group that we like to give acknowledgement to is Alive and Well Communities in St. Louis to help us develop that curriculum. One aspect of the class that we really hammer home is it's not what's wrong with you, because we do that. We see people who are struggling with addiction. We see people who are struggling with mental illness. And we'll be like, man, what's wrong with you? Why are they doing that? And it's not what's wrong with people, right? It's what happened to them. And I think a lot more people, whether it's our TSSs or even each of us as individuals, we're really starting to see that we have to realize what happened to someone. For me to really be able to help you physically, mentally, emotionally, I need to understand what happened to someone. And it's not a judgment. It's not what's wrong with you. Because I tell people all the time, there's plenty wrong with me. Buckley probably tell you too, after 30 years of law enforcement, we both have some trauma that we've been through, and I'm sure think about it often. So it's no longer what's wrong with people, it's what's happened to them. And I think for us at public safety here at Bi-State, we want to try and see what we can do to truly help people overcome those challenges of that past trauma, things that happened to them. And this is one aspect of it. So we really appreciate the chance to show this program to you all today. And I hope that encourages you to reach out and look at doing a program like this in your communities. Mike, I'll throw it back to you unless we have any questions or anything like that we need to address.
Thank you, Larry. And I will say this was a very comprehensive training. I personally had written down 5 questions before we started because I wanted to get to know some information. I was curious to know if it caused harm, if you thought someone was having an overdose and turned out they weren't, but covered that.
That was a lot of times, that was one of the first things that people, especially law enforcement officers, they'd say, well, wait a minute, what if I give it to them and they're having a diabetic seizure? What if it does nothing? And I'll even admit this. I was proving to not one of our classes, but an offsite class one time before. We were talking about whether or not it would do anything to someone. I can tell you by experience that you can shoot the naloxone into your nose. It doesn't do anything. It makes you want to blow your nose. It's literally like blowing a nasal spray into your nose. So all that does is it just removes the chemical from that receptor, allows that person to start breathing better again. But other than that, if you don't have that, and it's a diabetic issue, then it's not going to have an issue for you. So that's a great question. And we tell people all the time, if you're not sure, go ahead and use it and deploy it just to make sure.
And I know you mentioned that security officers were receiving the naloxone and the training. Are operators also getting the training? Bus operators, Metrolink operators, are they being trained and given the Narcan to carry as well, or is it a individual choice on their part?
We trained our first new class of operators last week. There hasn't been a policy put in place at this point for the operators, but we trained the bus operator trainers as well last week. So hopefully it will move into the operators as well.
That's great, because yeah, I know the security is on the trains, and but they're not always there, as opposed to the operators that are obviously always available, especially on a bus.
Yeah, and we're definitely open for that, because like I said, I was very excited, and I know we were very pleased to be able to get it to the river boats and get it to the airport too, because like I said, my state's not just Metro, and for us, we want to make sure that every opportunity we have it available, and that's why we really wanted to be able to push it out to all employees, and we got a great response from that. Like I said, several full departments came to us about the training, so we had great participation from that. And like I said, hopefully, Mike, when you get on that next LRV or a bus, there'll be a naloxone kit there, just in case. Because, like I said, we talked about earlier, from your own experience, you've seen an overdose, out there in the public. So it does happen, and happens, unfortunately, too frequently in our area.
Yeah. Yes. So, well, I thank you both for your time. We're actually coming up on the end of an hour, so I will wrap up with an apology for the technical difficulties at the beginning. I had muted my own device so that I wasn't causing any noise, and apparently if I mute myself when a video is playing, it mutes the video as well. So things that you learn on Zoom even after 1.5 years of
Music.
I'm gonna close out with a few remarks, just to let people know we have a couple other upcoming events. July 8th, we're going to be hosting an event to present the results of the statewide transit needs assessment. And on September 28th and 29th, we will be hosting our statewide transit conference and expo in Springfield, Missouri. If you have a chance, please go on our website and consider joining us for those events. If you're not a member, please consider joining MPTA. Consider sponsoring the next MPTA educational series or attending the upcoming conference. So we hope to see you all soon, in person in September, virtually in July. And again, Larry and Stephen, thank you both for the presentation today. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else on the.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Thank you.